All right, so welcome everyone to the Coding Cleverly podcast. It's another episode here, and I'm with one talented individual named Rafid Han. He is an engineer at Tesla. He has done his mechanical engineering at University of Alberta, and he has an exciting story to tell. So, Rafid, can you just briefly introduce yourself? Welcome to the podcast. Love to have you here.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me here today. So I'm Rafid. I'm a mechanical engineer at Tesla. My background is primarily in Canada. I did my undergrad at the University of Alberta, grad school currently at Georgia Tech in computer science. But I had the opportunity primarily to work in mechanical engineering across quite a few different areas prior to Tesla, oil and gas. I spent some time at Tesla on the automotive vehicle design side of the world, and now I'm more of the cell design and engineering side.
Amazing. Just a quick intro. Let's go back and just talk about your childhood. Like, were you always interested in like how things worked and all this technical space?
I guess it really depends how far back you go. In all honesty, I would say probably until I was like 10 or 11. I was just super interested in soccer, and my dream was that I would become a soccer player when I grew up. I would really say like the interest in engineering really only came for me in high school. Started looking at what I want to do in university, and I would say engineering wasn't the most apparent answer to me, but I think it was more so kind of looking at what am I not interested in, and the natural conclusion to that was that engineering was ultimately what best aligned with what I wanted to do long term.
Amazing. And were you originally inspired to pursue mechanical engineering, or was it just some kind of decision that you had to end up making through your parents or something?
Yeah, no, this was, I guess my parents were completely open to whatever I wanted to do. And for us at the University of Alberta, the first year is like a general first year engineering. So you don't choose which specific, type of engineering you're going to go into until your second year. And so that first year for me was very much the same of, kind of deliberating and ultimately in many cases going back and forth on what type of engineering I want to go into. And so I had pretty much narrowed it down to, I would either go and do uh, computer engineering, mechanical engineering, or civil engineering, which, at first glance seemed very, very different in terms of fields of study. Civil engineering really came up just because I had started doing civil engineering research in my final year of high school. And so I had a lot of exposure to that side of the world. And, it was something I was strongly considering. Software engineering, computer engineering as a whole was something where, I kind of generally gravitated towards that historically. I'd done a lot of coding in high school and prior to, and it was something I could see myself doing to an extent long term. And then eventually, a lot of back and forth. What I ended up realizing was that what I liked about civil engineering really was just the ability to physically design things that are tangible and you can look at, you can feel. But I wasn't as strongly interested in say structures and whatnot.
Hmm.
And so what ended up happening is I kind of looked at mechanical engineering as a whole, and it was like what, like there are the aspects of civil engineering that I enjoy in it, but there's also the versatility to go and design pretty much whatever I want effectively. Um, and so then it became a matter of like, do I do mechanical engineering or do I do software or computer engineering? Um, Ultimately, mechanical engineering, at least at that point in time, the decision to do that was primarily because I thought that I would be more likely to pick up a textbook from, say, computer science than I would for a textbook from mechanical engineering. And so pretty much that ended up being the route I went down. And frankly, I think it was a great decision.
Amazing. That's so, interesting. And were you always good at mathematics, or was it like something, you had to get good at?
I mean, I think I was always like reasonably good at it.
And how,
But
yeah, how is it more practical and useful in your field, like what you do in day to day?
Yeah, so I guess at Tesla, one of the big, I guess, focuses that we have is really building things up from first principles. And so a lot of it is, if you think of for an engineering courses, it's things you do in your first year, second year, to an extent your third year. You're basically trying to build up these designs from that level. And while it might not be every day that I'm using calculus, those fundamental concepts are being used day to day on everything you're doing. And there have been one or two cases where I actually have had to go back and do calculus just to build up a concept and
Hmm.
validated works from first principles basis.
Right. So mathematics is very important.
Definitely, yes.
Speaking, let's go with the university life and early engineering journey, where you did and complete your undergrad, and it was through University of Alberta. How was that university, and how did that change you to the person who you are right now?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Edmonton, which is where the University of Alberta is located. So
It's in
for me, it's
Canada,
kind of
right?
like in Canada, yes.
Hmm.
And so it's almost like a natural decision point of, we've got a really good school over where I live, why not let's go over there. It's one of the best engineering schools in Canada. And so, when I started that journey, I think overall, my first year was fantastic. Really got to dive into engineering, a lot of opportunities outside of the classroom, to do really, let's say, whatever you were interested in. The partway through my second year of engineering is when COVID happened, and so, a considerable chunk of my degree actually ended up being online, just due to COVID. But I think it was a very interesting dynamic to see how, you had a ton of opportunities pre-COVID. During COVID, you pretty much saw our school, along with pretty much everyone else, trying to adapt to being very much digital first, and then, towards the tail end of my degree, pretty much like the final year or so, it was back in person, and that was definitely a very different experience. And ultimately, I think I would have much preferred being in person entirely to fully leverage the opportunities that are available. But I think on the whole, it was a phenomenal experience.
Amazing. Any favorite or toughest class?
I have to say, toughest class for me, we're going back to math, was partial differential equations. It was pretty much the last math class I took, and it was actually during COVID. I remember my final exam, just due to the fact that everybody's online, the prof made it the final exam scheduled from 11 p.m. to 11 a.m.
Oh,
And so it was two questions only, right? And so you would think it's like, okay, not too bad of an exam and whatnot. But I remember it was like during Ramadan, it started at 11 p.m., and I pretty much worked all the way until 6:30. So, I made sure to eat like, I guess not breakfast, but like eat sahur, and then you pray fajr, and then you just keep going. And then I remember 6:30 in the morning, I was like, you know what, I'm done. Let me sleep a little bit, and then I'll wake up and check the rest. And I remember I slept for 2 hours, got up, and I was like, hey, you know what, let's just double check everything, make sure it's good. And I did well in the class, but it was one of those exams where I walked out of it with like, this is the hardest two-question exam I've ever done.
wow. Those two questions kind of took hours to complete.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. What was the first engineering project or competition you basically participated in, and you feel like that kind of was useful for your jobs that you applied for later on?
Yeah, I guess my first engineering exposure as a whole is actually more on the research side of the world with like structural engineering. I would say, that definitely had a certain value towards, let's say, the research and academia side of the world, and the opportunities that came after that research group. But I'd say from a career standpoint, even looking at the things I do now, I was on a team called EcoCar. That team basically builds pretty much we design and build hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, and so I was pretty much, new member at the start. Eventually, I was heading up the entire team, but holistically, it was really just going, from the beginning of the design process and doing all sorts of components in the vehicle. Ended up really developing my actual core design skills. So it's not just going and doing math, but actually being able to practically do it. Being hands-on, actually fabricating the parts that I'm designing. And ultimately, I think that is what led me to, work at Tesla during my degree as an intern. And I think in large part, me being back here even now could in part be attributed to that group.
Amazing. You mentioned that your internship, and I just wanted to know how did you land your internship, and how was that experience? Going to your first ever type of job. Internship is also a job. So how did you get that opportunity, and what shined? Basically, what was the edge from you over the other candidates, thousands of others?
Yeah, so I guess let's say we talk about Tesla specifically in that internship that I did. At that point in time, I already had quite a few other internships I'd done. So, like our school as a whole, you have a co-op program, and so you're required to do 20 months of work experience. And so I had a couple different internships prior to, not necessarily directly related to the stuff I end up doing at Tesla. And so again, kind of looking at what gave me the edge, I kind of go back to these project groups that I was on, where there's a clear, tangible design. There's a clear outcome that you can speak to in terms of whether it's mass optimization, performance in competition, whatever it might be. But like there's that actual numerical output that you can speak to. So that ended up being part of it. I don't think I had really any special edge in terms of applying. I just really applied online and ended up getting the interview. I do remember, at least for the team I had ended up joining, the interview was very much focused on, do you have a sound understanding of like the core engineering fundamentals? And so, it's split up across two interviews. Everything pretty much focused on statics, dynamics, some of the courses you take in second year engineering, really just making sure that you fully grasp and understand those concepts. You're not just staring at a formula sheet and, trying to solve the problem. You're pretty much intuitively off the bat able to look at a problem, understand, here's what's relevant, distill that information down, and then go ahead and solve it.
Right. And you mentioned that 20 months of co-op, so that means that was important from your graduating perspective. If you didn't do that, you were not going to graduate. And co-op, for the general audience, can you tell, like, is this paid, unpaid? Everyone has the opportunity to do it? And does it companies like Google, Microsoft come in co-op, or is it just affiliated to what university you are in?
Yeah, so holistically, co-op is really it's a cooperative education or experience program, is what it is, and so typically it's associated with the university. Actually, it's integrated into your degree as well, and so what it is, at least in the case of University of Alberta, is you are as part of your degree required to get a certain amount of experience. In our case, 20 months, in order for you to graduate. And when you graduate, it will say that you graduate with a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering with co-op. So that does show up on the degree, but
Okay.
I think more than it showing up on the degree, it's fundamentally that you need to go and get work experience. To the latter parts of your question, the companies that show up, I think, in large part depend on which degree you're in. So we had a job portal inside, specific to students at the U of A. And, if you were in, say, computer science, software engineering, that's probably where you'd see more of the tech companies show up, just because of the locality where oil and gas is more prevalent for mechanical engineering, at least. Most of the jobs that showed up were more, oil and gas related.
And you mentioned that you had the technical rounds with that Tesla, and you kind of had two different interviews. Were there more of hands-on problem solving where you had to solve maybe through typing and show your screen to the interviewer, or was it more of like verbal communication and delivering answers to their questions and behavioral style questions, what normal tech interviews conduct?
Right. Yeah, I would say it's similar to the first one. Obviously, in more of the computer science world, you see more of a focus on like, going through these coding exams and questions and typing on your screen. Just for mechanical engineering, what ended up happening was it was more pen and paper style. So, they would show a question on their screen. I would have like, a pencil and paper, and I pretty much drew out something or, wrote out certain equations, and I kind of showed it to them on my camera of like, here's what I'm thinking, here's what my train of thought is, and then, kind of solving the problem in that way. But fundamentally, it is still the same concept of working through a problem and coming to a solution.
Right. I mean, you in your let's say profile and resume, you have a lot of experience with oil and energy industries as well. You mentioned Suncor and the other company. So, how did you work at these companies as well, and what is different from them as compared to what Tesla is? And any differences, any things that you like, dislike?
Yeah, so one of my goals when it came to co-op as a whole was that because I wasn't dead set on a specific industry, my goal in co-op actually was that I would go out and work in different industries and different sectors. And so, part of my, let's say, exploration was that I was going to do at least one internship in oil and gas, just due to that being, pretty much the primary, source of jobs available in the locality I lived in. But part of it is also, I wanted to go and work in Silicon Valley and whatnot. And so pretty much with every co-op or internship I applied for, it was like, I'm going to look for a new type of experience, just so that when I graduate, I can be more informed on, what industries am I actually interested in, what type of roles am I interested in. So that was really the first part. In terms of, I guess, the differences and nuances of each industry and each role, um, I think a lot of it just comes down to what you're interested in, right? Oil and gas is very much well established. It's been here for decades and decades, in Alberta at least. And so you have very well established practices. You have a ton of people who have like a plethora of experience. And when you're an intern, it's just, you're just able to soak up all the knowledge that they have. But at the same time, the from a business point of view, the focuses in that industry are very much about, cost optimization and really becoming more profitable. And so, I would say the shift is a little bit further away from R&D and new technology development. At Tesla, it was kind of the exact opposite, where it was really all about, we're going to create this new technology. It's an emerging market, and it's pretty much all in on engineering, trying to make the best possible product, especially with competitors popping up all around the world. And so I think it really just comes down to what you're interested in. Both have their merits, and I think it really just is. Do you enjoy the structured learning approach, or do you appreciate that certain level of uncertainty and ambiguity and trying to come up with designs which may or may not work?
Amazingly said. What's something most people don't kind of understand about working in oil and energy industries and engineering in general in those particular fields?
Yeah, I think when you look at energy or say oil and gas as a whole, um, I think there is a certain say stigma surrounding getting into that industry, in large part to the perception of it, being a shrinking industry, in terms of perhaps not being the most appealing in terms of environments and whatnot. I would say that there is perhaps a certain element of truth to it. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, about cost optimization and becoming more profitable, there are going to be impacts to the number of engineers out there and the opportunities that come up. But I think one thing that I did see over there is really that there is still quite a bit of engineering going on. It might not be quite as flashy as what we see with consumer devices and things that we generally see across the tech sector. But there's a lot of really complicated engineering going on. There's ultimately quite a bit of high impact you do as an engineer, and so I don't think it's necessarily strictly the case that one should shy away from oil and gas, at least immediately. I think there is definitely some value in at least considering the long-term value and impact. Even if when you look at it from a, let's say, global macroeconomic point of view, there, pretty much across all industry reports you look at, there is still going to be some level of oil and gas in the future. And so, um, really, I think it's just a matter of is that opportunity right for you?
You're now pursuing like a master's degree in machine learning at Georgia Tech. So what inspired that shift?
Yeah, so I guess going back to what type of engineer I end up going into, I earlier talked about this, deliberation between do I want to go down like that software engineering route or mechanical engineering, and ultimately I told you this whole notion of the textbook and which textbook would I rather pick up.
Yeah.
What ended up being the case is I went to mechanical engineering, but pretty much throughout my degree I actually still ended up doing a bunch of coding and pretty much ended up learning a lot of what you would learn in an undergrad computer science degree. And so after I graduated, it was kind of this decision point on, okay, I know I want to do grad school in some fashion. Do I want to do mechanical engineering or do I want to do, something else? And initially I was going to go down the mechanical engineering route, but then kind of when I looked at, what is the actual outcome I get from a mechanical engineering master's, to me at least, it was like the opportunities I was getting out of undergrad and the opportunities I would get after doing a master's degree weren't all that different. And at least the ones which were different weren't specific areas I was too keen on going into. And so it became a matter of, okay, well, like if I'm not really going to get too much, let's say, tangible value add from doing a mechanical engineering master's,
Hmm.
are there other degrees that perhaps are of greater interest? And I think the natural conclusion to me was, okay, well, what, computer science is super interesting to me, machine learning and all that, a lot of interest there. And I think especially where there isn't as much of an intersection just yet of, say, like the physical mechanical engineering world with machine learning. I thought, this is maybe a really good opportunity to kind of leverage both my interests and develop a very unique skill set.
Amazing, amazing. Um, how do you see ML and AI blending into mechanical engineering and this in the future? What's going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, we're very early stages. What I would say, a lot of it is going to be speculative, I would say. But in terms of what I've seen, or even implement in my day to day, I guess there's really, let's say, two broad realms that I've seen it primarily implemented. One is if you go into the simulation side of the world, so find element analysis, CFD. That's pretty much stuff that I used to do in my internship at Tesla. We're starting to see now that there is some level of integration with machine learning. So trying to, so let's say any kind of part you're trying to simulate, generating those meshes, using machine learning, trying to do simulations using machine learning instead of the actual simulation method is something that's currently being explored. I don't think it's been fully fleshed out yet, but the concept really is that you can use machine learning to simulate various studies, and you don't need quite as much compute as a traditional simulation would take. And so you end up saving a ton of time and resources is the core idea. The other side of the world is, when we talk about, say, oil and gas or really any kind of processing plant, what I've started to see is, a lot of the work that's done there is really data driven, and you're taking in a huge amount of data. And so, in a way, that almost lends itself towards machine learning, where, can you optimize a plant for performance using machine learning? Or can you, let's say, if you're in more of the new product development side of the world, can you leverage the data that you get to understand for, target output recipe, let's say, of a certain process? Is there, certain things that are being overlooked by humans, which machine learning is uncovering as, you need to, let's say, increase a certain amount of a certain chemical to get a certain desired outcome in terms of performance.
Very interesting. And yeah, and I feel like that machine learning part can definitely leverage the the daily tasks and routine tasks that you do at a mechanical engineering firm, right? And I feel like the part with ML where they can kind of learn everything and kind of give you good outcomes based off past learning and experiences can definitely help streamline processes. What's one skill you wish more engineers learned?
Yeah, I think this is actually something that ties back to why I'm at Tesla, and it's really this notion of first principles thinking. Um, it's something I haven't seen anywhere else that I've worked, but I think it's so critical and useful. Is really, you spend a number of years, typically 4 years in engineering. You learn about all these different theories and concepts, and typically when you go out after you graduate, and most places you work at, um, in part due to the complexity of and the difference in difficulty of the projects you're working on after you graduate versus what you're doing in school. There typically tends to be a bit of a disconnect between what you learned in school and like what you're actually doing day to day.
Yeah.
But I think it's so critical that you're still able to look at a technical problem, whatever you're working on, and still be able to bring that all the way back to a first principles basis and kind of build it up from there. The main reason I think it's just so imperative to be able to do that is there are oftentimes big opportunities to innovate, or at the very least, avoid mistakes in a design just by building things out from that level, right? We sometimes think, oh, the rest of the industry has done X, Y, Z, and therefore we should just do the same. But sometimes by challenging those assumptions, building things out, from the ground up, you're able to realize that maybe there is a much more advantageous pathway to take, and ultimately that leads to you innovating more. Or at the very least, it's something incremental, and you end up maybe doing the same thing as the industry, but very well that that is the best approach to be taking.
So you mentioned the term first principle,
Yes,
and that's what people should like adopt.
that's what I think. Yeah, so it's really, can you reason things out, say from like a first year or second year engineering level? Those concepts, can you build it all the way up to whatever you're trying to design?
Amazing. Uh, what advice would you give to students who want to work at companies like Tesla or Suncor?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is, it's really important to do well in school. Obviously, as I talk these first principles basis, like yes, you want to do well in school, make sure you understand those concepts, and the grades do matter to an extent, but on its own, I don't think it's sufficient. I think it's really important to go outside the classroom and get experience wherever you can.
Yeah.
If you can do co-ops, phenomenal. But even if you're not doing co-ops, going outside, joining those project groups, actually trying to build something with the skills that you've learned is super, super critical. I think one of the big things that I've noticed, other interns when I was an intern or even full time is, folks have actually gone out and built things with the skills that they've developed, and that at least creates something tangible, which when you're getting recruited, you can speak to.
Does GPA matter?
It's a tough question, and I don't think anybody has a very clear answer to it. My opinion is it matters to an extent, right? I was fortunate to do well in school, and I think that probably played a certain part in everything. But do I think that we need to be too concerned about, let's say, having a 4.0 GPA and like a 3.9? I don't think that'll make too much of a difference. Provide other things are there, but I do think it matters to an extent. That still want to do relatively well in school.
What was your GPA, if you don't mind telling?
It was pretty close to a 4. There was one class I didn't do too well in, but other than that, it was good.
That was awesome. We're gonna have some rapid fire questions, and you can tell your whatever comes in mind. So, Tesla or Suncor?
Tesla.
Okay, any reasons by?
Um, More engaging projects, more unknowns, so there's an opportunity to innovate. You get the opportunity to lead a lot more in technical projects. So both good and bad, but I think overall relatively good to have that freedom.
Hardware or software?
Currently hardware.
Okay. You don't like the combination of both, or you feel like uh, does should a person learn both, or should they become expert in one field?
I think it's important to have at least one area of expertise and kind of have that depth of experience. But I am at least of the view that you should still expose yourself to other fields as well. At least have like a working knowledge. Ultimately, in a lot of the things that you're going to be designing and working on, even in my day to day, I'm working with other engineering fields as well, and at least having a working knowledge allows those conversations to be productive, even if I'm not maybe an expert in those areas.
Oh wow. Favorite engineering tool or device?
NX, it's a CAD program. I think it's probably like the best CAD program I've used previously.
Okay, and you use that for simulations and designing?
Primarily for like design. Simulations, I typically use other software.
Okay. Dream company to work at?
Uh, Honestly, I eventually I do want to have my own startup actually, and
Okay.
so I think that would be the long term view and goal.
Awesome. What is it? More of AI or is it like just something else?
I I would say more so consumer hardware, smart wearables. It's the general idea of where I want to be going down.
Okay. So AI or mechanical engineering design?
Can I choose both?
Yeah, I mean, you want to mix up both, right?
I think fundamentally both is what I would gravitate towards.
Is there any favorite movie or show that innovate or inspires you?
That to me at least, my favorite movie is Inception. I think in large part just due to the nature of having that, let's say, creativity aspect to it, where you can dream up your own world, and also a bit of the unknown, where it's really left up to your imagination. I think it really just, let's say, translating to the product side of the world just fosters the ability to imagine whatever you want and create that.
It's interesting that a lot of people have Christopher Nolan's movies as their favorites. So
Yeah, I mean, they're phenomenal movies on the whole. So
yeah, one word that describes your engineering journey so far.
innovative,
Competitive,
innovative.
innovative. Okay,
Yeah.
amazing. You can tell maybe a day-to-day life how it is at Tesla and like how do you guys normally start your work? Is it on the computer, laptops, or you go to the office? You can maybe just go and tell a rundown of it.
Yeah, so pretty much, I work out of the office entirely, at least for the team I'm on. I'd say most of my work is done, on the computer.
Here in Austin,
Um,
Texas.
Here in Austin, Texas, correct. And so, my day to day, I've got quite a few different projects that I'm looking at from a design standpoint. And so, really, it's you come in, meetings aside, it's really just a lot of heads down work of whatever design or project I'm looking at, trying to build that out. Oftentimes there's a lot of collaboration with other engineering folks, whether it's on my team or across other teams to kind of fully realize a certain design. And so um, really just depending on the scope of the project, it might be something where I can wrap it up in a couple hours, or for like the much bigger projects I'm doing, those are multi-year programs. And so you might spend like an entire day working on a certain design, and it might just be towards like a small deliverable. in terms of the overall design process. For where I am, at least in like the cell side of the world, we're fundamentally trying to produce cathode materials, and so part of my day will likely end up going either to the lab or out to our manufacturing plant, whether it's for a design I'm working on, or let's say a design that's already been implemented, just looking at how it's performing and seeing if there's improvements that can be made.
Any advice that you can give to those new joinees or new hire interns and stuff, how they can like maximize their chances of getting promoted in their companies and doing well for the team, so that they can like have a great job. There are a lot of people who kind of join companies and they have no clue what they're doing, and they don't have that great relationship with their managers. At the end of the day, they feel like, are they in the right place? So what is your piece of advice that you feel like you should do that could help you not only grow but also help create a great ecosystem with your employees, and potentially have you get promoted and rise in the corporate ladder?
Yeah, I think especially in the context of say early career, I think there's really two ways to look at this. One is that you're fairly young, you probably don't have quite as much experience as say more senior engineers do, and so I think it's really a really opportune window to be a sponge and just soak up information wherever possible. I don't think it's the best idea to just limit yourself to a single domain. I think it's just wherever the knowledge is, just soak it up, try and learn as much as possible. Ask questions as needed, and really just try your best on whatever projects you're on, and try and drive those through to completion. But the flip side of it is also that oftentimes you're going to be staffed on so many different projects, and there's going to be so many different asks that it's really imperative to know what is most critical and most valuable. And so, one of the things I think perhaps gets overlooked a little bit in the engineering side of the world is, ultimately these are businesses and they do have certain business goals and strategies that need to be met. And so, whenever you're working on a project, I think it's really imperative that you're also thinking about what is the actual business value of what I'm working on, and is what I'm doing actually driving the most value added impact.
Rightly said. So we're closing up, and I just wanted to you to give maybe a one line or one sentence advice to anyone out there. Any piece of advice you'd like to give.
Yeah. Learning really never stops. And, I think failure holistically is going to happen. I think it's just imperative to recognize that failure is just part of that journey. So don't look at failure as, say, a negative thing. I think it's just something to be embraced as part of that journey towards success. And whatever definition of success you look at, it's really just a small step of that journey to that end goal.
5 stars. So, in where can people reach out if they need any advice? Rafid Han's website, bio, anything you would like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I have LinkedIn, I'd say is probably one of the best places. I'm actually going to be starting up a YouTube channel, probably focusing again a lot of on the AI mechanical side of the world. And so once that's there, I can maybe link it to you and you can put that in the description. But
Definitely. Yeah, we'll add that in the description, hopefully, whenever it started. I started my YouTube channel when I was in college, and so I was basically learning introduction to object-oriented programming or programming fundamentals in C++ or something, and I just started making videos out from there.
yeah,
So, yeah, and yeah, we'll definitely put those links. And thank you so much for the time and the great piece of advice, and all that journey that you shared. Uh, we loved to hear all of this, and thank you so much for all of that. Um, and yeah, hope we can meet again somewhere.
yeah. Likewise, thanks so much, Harris, for
All
having
right,
me.
all
Really
right.
enjoyed the chat.
Take care, man. Bye.
You as well. Bye.